to our talk today. We're going to be talking about how to design a complete strength routine, specifically focusing on the lower body portion of that routine, and we'll do upper body the next time around. Peter, if you could pick two lower body patterns that you get to do for the next year, though only those two, what are you picking?
Whew, that's a tough question, man. Well, I'd say at this stage of my life, being in my upper 40s, I have a son who's about to turn 10 pretty fast, but daddy's got to beat him as long as possible. So with that in
Nice.
mind,
Yep.
I'm going to probably go with like a single leg kind of skater squat. So a pretty kind of
Okay.
going down,
Love it.
tapping the knee to the ground and back up, and then doing probably like a GHR Nordic, something that really can make my hamstrings more or less bulletproof. So as I'm trying to exert a lot of force into the ground, I think both of these patterns will help me beat my son for a little bit longer. What about
Okay,
you, Kyle?
that's a good why behind the. There's no wrong answer, but as long as you have a good why, and that was a good why. I'd say for me, probably a front squat and then a single leg hinge. The front squat's one I just like it. Just one of my favorite big lifts where there's a good amount of load on my body that I have to stabilize and just put a lot of force into the floor to drive up out of the bottom. And I like the mobility benefits I get out of that too. It requires a pretty upright torso. I get good ankle and hip mobility out of doing that. And then I'd pair that with the one leg hinge just because those two complement each other kind of well. One's a squat, one's a hinge, which we'll talk about shortly. The hinge being single leg would mean I get to challenge my balance, which I don't get in the front squat. I still get to hold pretty heavy weight with that exercise, which I don't get in the front squat. So I think that would be a pretty good 1-2 punch if I had to pick just two. Thankfully, we don't.
The postural benefits of those two, like you said, just having to
Yep.
hold that position, both in those with a load, and it's pulling you into our position that we see everybody spend way too much time in. So I was like, I think that's another phenomenal benefit of both of those patterns.
Indeed. So let's now dig into our talk today and talk about why those were decent choices. But thankfully, we have more options than that, right? Main topics today. What movement patterns need to be included in a lower body strength routine? Like these are your must do, like to be a complete routine. These things need to be there. And then what else might you do? What parameters should you follow based on what your goals are specifically? Okay. Quick sidebar before we get into today's chat. If you have not listened to our previous talk on full body sessions and why we use full body sessions with most clients, we'll just quickly review that, right? We do full body sessions with the vast majority of our clients for 4 main reasons. Number one, it fits better with the schedule and consistency of most people. Most people have 2 or 3 days a week to train. They're probably going to miss like 1 session a month because of some random, kid had an emergency doctor's appointment, whatever. If you miss your leg day that week, well, now you didn't train legs for 2 weeks, right? If you miss one of your 3 full body sessions, well, hey, you still hit a good, well-rounded routine that week, just with a little less frequency, right? So that's really far and away the number one answer, is that it just fits better with most people's lives. But some other reasons: there's mobility benefits to moving your full body more frequently under load in the week. There's recovery benefits from not crushing one area of your body every time you go into the gym. And then there might even be some hypertrophy and strength benefits from the higher frequency. Hypertrophy is mainly driven by how many hard sets you do in a week. If you do 15 leg sets in one day versus 5 leg sets spread out over 3 days, you might push the 15 sets on average harder than when they were all on the same day. And then strength-wise, you just get more chance to practice the patterns you're trying to get stronger at, right? So just a quick review of that talk. If that interests you, go scroll back on our feed and find that. But we say that now just to reiterate that this talk isn't about the perfect lower body workout, the perfect leg day. It's just about like what lower body strength patterns and parameters should be present over the course of your week, regardless of whether you're training with full body or split sessions or how many days a week you're training, etc. These things will apply no matter what. We're not giving you one perfect workout here. Cool. So with that out of the way, let's now get to the main agenda. What are the must-do lower body movement patterns, right? Number one, the squat, right? The classic exercise, maybe the first exercise you think of when you think of strength training. What is the squat? It's a movement before it's an exercise, right? This is lowering your center of mass. We do this all the time to squat down to pick up the big box or to sit down on the couch and get back up from the couch. Right? This is just a human fundamental movement. Can I lower my center of mass to the ground? We did it a whole lot more before we had chairs. People used to eat like this all the time. This is just a comfortable resting position to do stuff, right? Um, these exercises that kind of fit into the family of squatting, you might hear them go by the description of knee dominant, because that's the main joint that's moving in these lifts, or quad dominant, because that's the main primary mover of the exercise. Not the only muscle involved by any means, but you might hear this movement pattern family described that way.
Think of
Go ahead.
your 1-year-old kid, right? Where are they at? They have crazy mobility, and then now they're starting to create stability. They're starting to be able to move around, crawling. Now they're starting to stand. Now they're starting to walk and then run. How do they pick up their toys? This beautiful squat. They lower down. Their torso's nice and tall. Looks absolutely beautiful. Pick stuff up, walk around. You never see little kids complaining about low back pain, right? They have access to all
Yep.
this, and it just looks wonderful. And that's something that we're always kind of striving to move more back into that area.
Yep. Our second must-do pattern is the hinge, which refers to hinging at your hips, right? You might also hear these described as hip dominant movements, since the hip is the main joint moving here, or glute and hamstring dominant movements, since those are the main muscles involved in this. And again, this is just our other primary movement pattern. I'm going to pull up pictures on the screen now of both, right? So that squat, again, if you're just listening, not watching, we have a picture of a more upright torso, lowering center of mass squat, and then a pattern with more of an inclined torso because I hinged at my hips, right? So both of these movement patterns are, again, vital for just the way you move through the world. Depending on the challenge in front of you, you're going to kind of use one or the other, or a combination of these two strategies to get the job done. So getting into an athletic stance as a linebacker, getting into your golf swing, or again, picking up the heavy box, picking up your kid, learning how to do these two movements well with proper stability, using the proper musculature, is just going to make you a thriving individual. Second and final quick sidebar of the day. This is really a spectrum. Squat to hinge is kind of a spectrum. Things don't always cleanly fit into one or the other. If you're just listening and not watching, I might even recommend you come back and tune into this, because I'm pretty proud of this slide. But we took 6 different exercises. A front squat, where the bar is racked in front of your shoulders, a Zercher squat, where you're holding the bar in your elbows, a back squat, bar on your back, a trap bar deadlift, a barbell deadlift, and then a barbell hinge. And you can see that there's varying amounts of ankle, knee, and hip bend and torso incline in these movements, right? We start with that front squat with lots of ankle and knee bend, more upright torso, and as we move down the spectrum and all the way down to that barbell hinge, it becomes more of a full hinge. So that front squat is like classically a squat. That hinge on the end is classically a hinge. Something like that trap bar deadlift in the middle is kind of somewhere in between, right? And it doesn't really matter which one you decide to call that one. Just make sure that in your week you have things from either side of the spectrum, right? That's kind of the main point we're getting at here today. So with that, let's go into squat variations, right? So what does this squat movement pattern family include? We got your classic double leg squats, probably the first thing you think of, right? So whether you're squatting body weight, or doing a goblet squat with a kettlebell or dumbbell in front of you, or doing those various forms of barbell squats. This family would also include unilateral squats that are more on one leg than the other. So split squats or lunges that are kind of semi-unilateral things that allow, challenge balance a little bit, put more weight on one leg. Lateral squats and lunges where you're moving side to side, or fully single leg squats. We pulled up a couple pictures of those things on the screen. All those things still involve lowering your center of mass and pushing through the floor to get it back up. So a lot of the cues are similar. A lot of the muscles involved are similar. There's just subtle differences depending on which variation you're doing exactly, right? So, Peter's skater squat, he's lowering down to the ground, he's pushing through the floor, he's driving back up. That's a fully unilateral squat, right? That still would kind of fit into that same family. Going into the hinge variations, so you have hinges and deadlifts, whether you're holding kettlebells or dumbbells or a barbell or a trap bar, things where you're either a pure hinge would be just kind of hinging at the hips and then driving back up. A deadlift is where you go all the way to the floor. To do that, for 99% of people with their range of motion, you're going to have some knee bend there as well, but it still was mostly hips compared to a more upright torso squat. Right. There's also unilateral hinges, just like there was unilateral squats. So doing these things from a staggered stance or single leg. And then there's also like bridging variations where you have a weight on your lap and you're squeezing your butt and driving up. You can do those with one or two legs. You can do them with your shoulders up on a bench. You can do them with your feet up on a bench. Certain hamstring curl variations. A lot of those things still use butt and hamstrings as the primary mover. There's a little less load on like your spine there, which is a pro for, you can kind of isolate those muscles better. But, you also don't get some of of the torso and grip stability benefits out of those things. So again, pros and cons, but all those things fit into the family of hinging, right? I pulled up a picture here of a unilateral hinge and a barbell bridge on the screen to get you an idea of what those things look like. The hip joint is still the main joint moving in those. Butt and hamstring are still the main muscles working, fits into the same family. Okay. So at the simplest level, a complete lower body strength routine is just one that includes both of these fundamental movement patterns. And you'd be surprised how many of them don't. Most people are more familiar with the squat family of exercises for a couple reasons. It's a little simpler cueing wise if you haven't really been formally coached how to do it. Hinging looks like lifting with your back. It's really not. You're using the biggest, most powerful muscles in your body, and your core and lats and shoulders are stabilizing you. But it does look like something a little scarier than just squatting down to the floor for most novices to strength training. It's also easier to do in like a boot camp style class or from the comfort of your own home, because in the early stages, bodyweight lunges can be hard because you're still kind of moving your own center of mass up and down. To do a hinge, you kind of need some external load. So it's a little bit more accessible to do squats and lunges. So it's pretty common that we'll see someone, hey, what do I do on my leg day? I did squats, I did lunges, I did leg presses, and then maybe they did some hamstring curls, but the vast majority of their work was probably more from that squat family. So we just want to see a good balance of both of these things over the course of your week, right?
Again, what can you see in the mirror?
Yep.
I can see the front of my body.
A phenomenal
I might
point.
feel my butt, but I see the front. So it's like, I'm going to train so I get that visual aesthetic. Yes, I did that. Ooh, I look good.
Yep. 100%. People that like blow up their quads when it comes to the lower body. So an example full body routine, and this is pretty much the exact lower body routine I'll start the majority of people off with on their first program. Day one might be doing a squat and a bridge. Day two might be doing a hinge and a split squat. Okay. If we're doing a full body routine, we'll have an upper push and pull in there too. A little sneak preview of our next talk about upper body strength. But on each of these 2 days here, we have a hip dominant pattern, the hinge on one day, a bridge on another day. We have a squat on one day and a split squat on the other day. So we have a squat pattern on each of those 2 days. And those will just be two solid days to get them strong and get them comfortable with these two different styles of moving their body, right? Probably 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 12 reps to start things off. Just minimal effective dose. You're going to get stronger and kind of learn the movements well doing that. Right. Does that look like what you've started your clients off with too, Peter, on a typical first program working with somebody?
All the time. It's just like, sometimes you start getting out here, start talking about this and this, and it's like, if you can't do the basics well, what are you doing? And just thinking again, back to that developmental stage. What are those fundamental things that you do in day-to-day life? Kind of nail all those suckers right here.
Yeah. And the beauty of the basics is that they don't ever stop working, right? You could just keep progressing these things. You could do this routine as a 10-year veteran with more weight on the bar than you were when you were a newbie, and it would still be a good strength routine. I'd look at that and I'd be like, boom, yep, thumbs up, nice job. That is a well-rounded, complete lower body strength routine. Now, let's talk about, if you do want to take it further though, what that could look like depending on your goals, right? So there are 3 main variables that we're going to talk about today that you could emphasize with your lower body strength training regimen, right? We could really prioritize mobility and injury prevention. We could prioritize hypertrophy, building muscle mass. We could prioritize peak strength. How much force can you produce, right? Let's dig into the first one, mobility and injury prevention. The main question you're going to ask yourself here is, what positions am I getting into, and do I have capacity in those positions? Long story short, spend some time training at end range. So this is where strength training can really improve your mobility and not just the range, but your capacity in those ranges. So let's run through some examples. Deep squats. That's a great mobility drill for your ankles and hips. Split squats, where one leg's back behind you. That's a good mobility drill for your hip flexors. A lot of us spend a lot of time seated, like I'm sitting right now, right? I can't wait to do a split squat later and get my leg back behind me. Lateral squats, moving side to side. We are 3-dimensional human beings. Most of us do not move laterally and rotationally enough. Getting into a lateral squat can be a great mobility drill for your adductors, your inner thighs. Hinging, on whether it's on 2 legs or 1 leg, is basically a loaded stretch to your hamstrings if you're doing it right. I have a client right now who cannot believe that he's more flexible than ever with his forward bend in his 60s because he had never hinged before in his life. And he's now preaching the benefits of strength training to everyone. You got to hinge. Trust me, that can work. Specifically, hinges on 1 leg can often improve hip internal rotation too, which isn't a movement that you realize you're missing until you're missing it. But when you have better hip rotation, everything just feels a little bit easier. So all these different patterns here are kind of strength at length patterns, is kind of a nice nickname for them. You're getting into a lengthened position of your muscles, but getting strong there. So if this is your main goal, prioritize these patterns specifically, whether they're main patterns in your day or maybe some light sets in your warm up. And then you'd add other lower body patterns like deadlifts, bridges, things that aren't really the strength at length, putting you at end range of a muscle around them. But you might want to prioritize these first.
The more your body touches those end ranges, the more it's apt to keep and maintain that mobility that's there. So many people will, hey, let's go to a stretch place and let somebody stretch me out. Oh man, when I leave, I feel so good. 3 hours later, hey, show me where you are now. And they're like, oh, I'm back to where I was before I went to that stretch person. So their body was like, oh, cool. I found all this range. There's nothing there. There's no strength there to keep it there. So I'm going to go back to where my comfort zone is. Yep. So getting to these end ranges, spending some time there, getting stronger at those end ranges. Now your body's more apt to keep it the result. So you wake up the next day, hey, I'm still as mobile as I was the day before. Wow, because my body trusts me. I'm not as guarded and I'm scared to go there.
Yep. Could not say it better, right? So a sample program here could look very similar to that beginner program. It's just like with your pattern selection, you're going to prioritize those end range patterns. So in this program we just pulled up on the screen, this person on one day is doing a hinge and a rear foot elevated split squat. They're getting some hamstring mobility from the hinge. They're getting some hip flexor mobility from that rear foot elevated split squat. The other day they're doing a front squat and some ankle and hip mobility out of that. And then a one leg hinge, again, getting a little more hamstring work, getting some hip internal rotation out of that. Like those are patterns I might select for someone who's making it clear to me that mobility is a priority for them. Right. Let's move into hypertrophy. So say your main goal is to build muscle mass. Volume in terms of number of sets per week is the main variable that matters here. So do more sets, right? You're still going to start with your various squat and hinge variations, right? Don't just skip the basics. Still do those big rock movements. But then you also might add in either more sets of those things, or you might add in more isolation work for more volume. So think like your hamstring curls, knee extensions, calf raises. Those things have value because even after you're tired from your heavy set of squats, well, I can go sit on the machine and do some knee extensions and get even more sets for my quads with a little less fatigue to the rest of my body now, right? So if this is a goal for you, those isolation patterns can make sense in addition to your squat and hinge, not in place of. Right. Basically ask yourself, what patterns allow me to put the most tension on the desired musculature that I'm trying to grow, right? So things where you're stable, safe, you execute the pattern well, those are the things that you should be prioritizing.
And something I was just thinking with a lot of these patterns, when our feet are in contact with the ground, so many people talk about, putting your weight into your heels, or here. As a general rule of thumb, try to keep that whole foot pressure. So it's kind of at the base of your big toe, your pinky toe, your heel, always feeling balanced and supported in all patterns. So your body accepts and likes that position and never feels, again, kind of that whole threatened thing. Mm-hmm. If you can do that and always feel balanced and controlled, there's a lot of things you're probably doing well.
Totally. Yeah. So it kind of feeds into that last question of what allows you to put the most tension on the musculature, proper technique, doing it well, doing it with good stability, but then also maybe even leaning into your strengths a little bit. Like I have clients who maybe their balance is a little shaky. So if their main goal is hypertrophy, we're going to do a lot of our time doing double leg lifts because they execute them better. Doesn't mean we're going to ignore the bad balance. We might work on that also, but if their main goal is building muscle mass, we got to do what they do well. On the flip side, say someone is rock star with balance, but they don't really have the torso stability to do heavy squats. Well, then we might work on that, but then we might spend a lot of time doing heavy lunges and split squats because they get more tension on their muscles out of those patterns, right? So just what do you execute well? Do those things and then address your weaknesses as needed. Right. A sample hypertrophy program that we just pulled up on the screen here. This person has just added a third day in from the previous program to get more volume in. They've also added some isolation work at the end. So each of their 3 days, they have a hinge and a squat pattern that they're working on, but then they're also getting in some extra bridging, some hamstring curls, some calf raises at the end of that day. Right. So again, if you're just listening, not watching, you can scroll over to the YouTube video and check out that sample program there. But anything that gets you more sets is going to be a hypertrophy focused program. Going into our last goal, strength. Intensity in terms of load on the bar, load that you're using is the main variable that matters for building strength. So you need to lift heavy, right? You're still going to start with the big squat and hinge variations, and you're going to pick lower rep ranges, kind of more in that maybe 3 to 5 or so if you have some experience, or at least closer to that if that's a primary goal for you. And you're just going to pick, hey, what patterns do I want to see the most improvement in? Do I want to get really good at my deadlift because that's just a good full body strength test? Is there a specific squat that I want to work on because it does carry over to this certain position in life that I want to do, or do I just like that pattern? What do I want to prioritize the most? Because although all these patterns will get your legs stronger, if you're really working on peak strength, they're almost all their own skill, right? So you're probably going to pick a pattern that you want to work on for at least a couple months at a time to really see some good progress there. And you're going to add supportive volume around that as needed / tolerated, right? So if peak strength is your goal, you don't need to do 20 sets. It's more about the intensity that you work up to. More hard sets would not be a bad thing, but you just kind of need to factor in, how am I recovering? Is this impeding my ability to go heavy again the next time around? Because if peak strength is the goal, then you might not need as much volume as you think, right? The sample program here, we still had a 3-day routine for this person. They're taking things seriously. They want a lot of practice with those big lifts. Here they're prioritizing the trap bar deadlift and the front squat. They're doing a couple warm-up sets and then building to a couple heavy sets of 3 to 5 on those lifts. And they have a little volume around that. Each day they're still doing a squat and a hinge pattern, but they're not doing excessive volume around that. If their main goal is, getting stronger in the front squat, at their stage, maybe doing more knee extensions isn't really going to move the needle much there. They'd be better off just kind of saving that energy to practice that big lift specifically.
And these heavy lifts are very neuromuscular demanding on your body. So you'll feel a different kind of fatigue, where one is more like the hypertrophy. You feel just, man, I'm just like, my legs are, I'm going to be sore tomorrow, whatever, and then when you do a strength workout, you're like, oh, that didn't feel like that much. It was really hard when I did those, a heavy set of 3, and I did 2-3 rounds of those. And then the next day you're like, my legs are fine, but like mentally I'm a little tired. I feel like I need a little more rest, a little bit more downtime. And those are different things, that the way your body responds based upon where you're at. That's why, like hypertrophy, more volume, more sets, that's good. When you start getting into real strength work, if you get too much extra stuff in there, it starts to impede that recovery. More, again, not necessarily muscles and soreness, but more how your body's functionally neuromuscular overall.
A perfect example of that is my current program right now. Again, there's a cajillion different ways to do this, but what I'm doing right now is more of a peak strength day on Mondays, and then more of a higher volume day on Wednesdays. And after Monday's workout, I'm just like kind of generally tired. I'm not really sore, but I just want to relax that day. I'm just kind of beat. And Wednesday's workout isn't as hard mentally to get psyched up for, because I just need to get the work done. It's not as kind of peak demanding as Monday, but I'm much more sore from Wednesday. I'm more locally fatigued in my legs after Wednesday's workouts, whereas after Mondays, I'm just more globally drained. So perfect example of what Peter's talking about right there. So in summary, squat and hinge. If you tuned us out the last 5 minutes and that's all you took away from this was just that I just need to squat and hinge, that's still great. Again, I'm pleasantly surprised when someone shows me their program and they say, is this a good program? And it has squatting and hinging. Most people are doing way too much squatting, not enough hinging. They wonder why their hamstrings are so tight and why their butt's really small. Please do both of these things, right?
That's a whole nother conversation there, Kyle.
But then now, how could you ramp this up if you want to take that further? If the main goal is mobility or injury prevention, we want to prioritize, building up capacity at end ranges. So deep squats, split squats, lateral squats, hinging on 1 and 2 legs, and still get strong, right? It doesn't mean you're just doing lightly loaded stretching. Like, still get strong in these positions, still progress that over time. You're going to prioritize those movement patterns. If your main goal is hypertrophy, you need to do more sets, still squat and hinge, add isolation work around that as needed. And if your main goal is strength, pick which patterns you want to work on, stay in a lower rep range, and go heavier on those patterns. That's really a complete lower body routine. If you show me your lower body workout and it's got squatting and hinging present, and then you're biasing one of those other things as appropriate for your goals, I'm giving you the big stamp of approval. That's a good program, regardless of exactly how the details worked out.
Cool. Yeah, and most importantly, don't skip leg day.
Yeah, just be consistent. Imperfect action beats perfect inaction. Just gotta get the work done. Don't spend more time designing your program than you do doing it.
Wonderful, love it.
Any other final thoughts?
No, just get that work in. It's amazing how training your lower body, how much it affects your entire body. It just makes you feel so much stronger and more confident too when you're able to do these things and your legs are strong.
Love it. Yep. Enjoy. Talk to you next time.